Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so excited today to be joined by the fantastic Joanna Johnson, who is the co-creator, executive producer, and showrunner of Good Trouble. And I wanted to start by asking a lot about the way in which you take these characters, and particularly looking at Callie and Mariana as the central focus of the show, and how even to this point you continue to have a lot of callbacks to who they were as characters when we first met them on The Fosters. You know, when we look at Mariana having some secrecy around dating her boss recently, her very first episode in The Fosters was about secrecy and not telling her family something. We have moments where we call back to Callie's impulsiveness. And if there's a real consciousness in thinking back to some of those moments and parallels that you want to pull in, or if it's just at this point a really natural trait as to who they've become as characters over the years.
I think because I've been writing them for 8 years now, it just comes naturally. I just know what their characters are and I know what they're going to do. And even though we aged them 5 years from The Fosters to Good Trouble, you do mature, but your basic nature doesn't usually change that much. And so Mariana still has a tendency to have trouble with the truth. You know, she still has a manipulative sort of side to her, but it's fun loving. I mean, it's usually for a good reason, sometimes a slightly selfish reason, but it's part of what makes her fun. And, for Callie, Callie's always been a serious character, and she's still serious, and she's not as impulsive as she was clearly when she was a teenager, but she still has that side to her. And I think it's something she's still trying to mature. They're still trying to grow up. I mean, I think their ages right now are like 23, 24 on the show. So they're still really young.
Yeah. And when you think about the evolution, not just of them as characters, but the rest of the characters that live in the Coterie each season, how much are you consciously thinking about the way in which you want to gradually change the stakes for them? Because like you said, they're all very much that point at young 20s, and so much changes year to year. And particularly if you look at Gael's plot line that just wrapped up with a pregnancy announcement at the end of the season finale, that really changes the stakes. He's now going from a character who doesn't have anybody to answer to having this whole new set of responsibilities. And you're gradually shifting that into a lot of the characters, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, having them have to take on more adult stakes, I think, is important. And we felt it was interesting to have him have to decide, like, how much of my life will I have to change if I'm going to be a father? And, it happens sometimes. You're very young and you don't expect something like that to happen. And is he going to be able to stand up and step up, I mean, to the responsibilities of that? I just thought that would be very interesting. He lives in a communal living situation. He lives on a rooftop next to a pool that's uncovered. He's doesn't have a bathroom in his own loft. How does he bring a baby into that? And how is this going to change his life? How is it going to force him to grow up? And the other interesting thing is, does it force him to have to abandon some of his dreams in order to provide? And I think that's something we all face it sometimes in our lives, where we kind of try to figure out how long are we going to pursue our dream before maybe we take a regular job, or, we decide that we have other responsibilities we want to live up to that we can't if we're not able to pay our bills, so those kind of questions.
Yeah. And with all of the things that every single character faces, it's really interesting because there's a lot of journeys that these characters go on where very frequently they would just become very introspective, and it would be a very internal journey. I mean, Dennis is the classic example of everything that he's been going through, but he has people around him. So he doesn't have the ability to just 100% shut off, and that's where the rapport with Davia came in, even with Malika unpacking some of the trauma from her past with her family in this season, particularly as well. Again, it's because there's always people around her. There's always a conversation about it. And so I wanted to ask about the very unique way in which the setting of the show and having that communal living space really allows a lot of internal journeys to become externalized throughout the show.
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, whenever you're doing a show, you can't have people just walking around with inner monologues, I mean, unless you're going to have voiceover, so you've got to figure out how to externalize their story. And I prefer to try to not, as much as we can, try to show rather than tell. We don't walk around as people, expressing our subtext. we usually don't tell people exactly how we feel, but our actions reveal so much about how we really feel. So that's something that we try to do on the show, but it is a soap. And you need to have characters talking, and the network often wants them to talk about their feelings and talk about what's going on. And so we definitely do that at times. But I think the whole reason to like the idea of the coterie really came from sort of mourning the loss of the Fosters. And I directed the last couple of episodes of the series, and I missed that kitchen table in the kitchen. I was like, I can't let go of this kitchen table. And what was so special about that show, I was like, how can we bring this into this new show? How can there be a communal table? And suddenly it hit us that, if they lived in a communal living space, with some people in LA do, we could have the show be about the family you make when you leave your family out in the world. And that just gave me a lot of, it just helped me with my grief in leaving the Fosters, that we were still going to do a family show, just a little bit of a different kind of family show. So that's kind of how we came up with the communal living. And, living on top of each other would naturally inspire a lot of conversations that you wouldn't necessarily have with a coworker. There's an intimacy to it. So that's really something that we wanted to preserve from the Fosters.
And one of the other things that the show does really well is that playing around with timelines, or having moments where there's an imagined conversation in response to something that a character is working their way up to saying out loud. And so we do get more of that internal subtext when you play around with that. But I think the reason why it is such a successful tactic is because you don't overuse it, and you're very judicious about when you bring it into the show, and make sure that it is always driving things forward, and that it doesn't become something that we're just becoming reliant on and expecting in every single episode. So as you're structuring out a lot of the episodes, how do you figure where you want to bring aspects like an imagined conversation, or, a tango dance that brings us into an internal dilemma, and to use those out of the box, breakaways from traditional format?
Yeah, I always wanted to be very careful that we didn't overuse it and people didn't get sick of it. And when we wrote the pilot, I read the pilot, and I remember lying on my couch in the office, and I read it, and I said, well, this is just straightforward. It just feels like, I was like, I want to do something different. I don't want to do a straightforward. I don't want to do the same show that we did on the Fosters. And stylistically, we wanted a new look. And I just thought, well, what if we played with timeline? And in a soap, you're always struggling because you're trying to have surprise after surprise, right? And especially when you have to have act breaks. Okay, so you have 6 act breaks. And so in an hour show. And you're trying to get a lean in with every act break. And I think that because soaps rely so much on surprise, you start to jump the shark fairly soon. And so I thought, well, what if we relied on suspense instead of surprise? So that you do things out of order, but you tease the audience. So you start at the end of an episode, or you start in the middle, and the audience goes, well, how do we get here? And then hopefully they're along for the ride to see how they got there. So I thought that might be a way to slow that kind of process down of having to have too many big soapy moments. And then, I like the idea of people saying things, and then you realize they didn't really say it. It was what they wanted to say, and they didn't really say it. We use it not that often because I think that would get super annoying after a while. And we do other things, like, which I still quite like, is when we just kind of are in slow motion, and then the conversation's going on, but you're just sort of watching the people. And I think that's fun too. But again, if you use it too much, the audience says, oh, it's gimmicky. And that's the same thing about jumbling up the timeline. A lot of times I found in the edit, I would put it back in order because I jumbled it too much and it was not making sense. So I feel like, let's put it back in order so we can understand it. And so I think as the show is evolving, those things are evolving too. I don't think we do them quite as much now in season 3 as we were doing them in season 1. But we still want to have these fantasy sequences that surprise you. And we had an animated teaser in episode 309. And I was trying to think of a teaser. I'm always trying to come up with some sort of teaser. And then I thought, oh, it would be fun if it was animated. And, then I go to production. I'm like, can we do an animated teaser? And they're all like, you're killing us, but it's the best team in the world. And they're like, anything you want, they'll do it. And so it's just that struggle to keep it fresh.
Yeah. And all of that really leads into the overall tone of the show as well, and enhances and adds to it. And so I wanted to ask about that initial journey and finding what the tone and the voice of the show was going to be, because, it is a spinoff to the Fosters, but you didn't want it to be exactly the same, tone and voice. And like you said, these characters are several years older. So the types of stories that you're dealing with are very different. And the show really brings in such a myriad of, romance, high stakes drama, deep cutting emotional drama, and, a lot of social and political issues as well. And so it's a real myriad. And so I was really fascinated by the journey of finding what that tone was going to be, and particularly because it is such an amalgamation.
Yeah, I have always enjoyed a mashup of tone. And because life is that, 1 minute something terribly sad has happened, and then you're laughing a second later. Or something completely bizarre happens. And so I think that tones can live together. So often in Good Trouble, you'll go from something very intense to something very light. And I really enjoy doing that. And because of the way we've structured the show, where where you can jump around, and we've kind of put in these fantasy elements, I feel like that we can do almost anything we want on this show and people will buy it, because we've set a tone of anything goes. And we've set a tone that this can be, like we did the episode with the raccoons loose in the Coterie. Like, we can do a completely farcical episode, and then we can do an incredibly, dramatic episode, like when Judge Wilson's son died. My niece had just died from an accidental overdose, and I wanted to do that story on the show. And I like the idea that, and that was in season 2, but I like the idea that you can turn on this show and you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know, it's not going to be the same tone every single time. And I really wanted to achieve that, so that, you're, as a viewer, you sit down. And as a viewer, when I sit down, I want to be like, oh, I wonder what I'm going to get today on this show. I don't want to think, oh, this is going to be the same show. It's going to be a voiceover person in the beginning and the voiceover person at the end. And it's going to be just this basic thing. And by the way, sometimes that's wonderful, and you fall in love with that show and you want it. There's some shows you want it to be the same every time because it's comfort. But I just wanted to mix it up, and it makes it more interesting for me too. Yeah. Having done this for a while, I have to keep myself interested.
And with a lot of the social and political conversations that you have on the show, what's so unique about Good Trouble is that it isn't an episode of the week. It isn't, okay, well, we did an episode on Black Lives Matter. It's the fact that the show has been dealing with that conversation for 3 seasons at this point, and you had Patrice Cullors even be part of the writing staff until she had so much work going with the movement that she had to step away from it. And so when you start thinking about what some of the topics and conversations like that are that you want to bring into the show, how far ahead are you thinking about where that structure could potentially go over the course of not just several episodes, but leaning into further seasons as well for these characters?
To be honest, I'm not a person who thinks far ahead. I do in life, but there are showrunners who say to me, I have the first 5 seasons in my head already. And I'm like, God, I wish I was like you. I love that. I let the show tell me. I think inspiration just hits. And so I don't know too far in advance what a character is going to do. And I think that because for me, my best ideas come in the moment. They don't necessarily come by planning. And I do plan, we do plan the season, but we often change our minds as we go. And I tell that to the writers, look, I'm going to change my mind. Just roll with it, because something else is going to seem suddenly more interesting. The character will speak to you. You'll see a scene and you'll say, oh, I love their dynamic. I want to lean into that. Or, I just don't want it to be too predetermined. So I couldn't tell you. I have no idea what happens if we have season 4. I don't really know what's going to happen, maybe more than 2 or 3 episodes in advance. And I've just always worked that way, and it just sort of works well for me. But I do know there are people who are like, I know every season of my show, and I think that's great.
Well, to that point as well, when you're deciding on something that you want to revisit and you want to bring back into a character's ether, one example would be looking at Mariana leaking the gender pay discrepancy at Speculate. And then that's something that all of a sudden has reared its head again, because now they're seen as troublemakers in the tech industry and they have a reputation because of it. And even though that's still been a prevalent theme, that's really bringing it back and revisiting it, which is something that you do often as well. Does that come off the back of really just waiting till you filmed episodes and seeing how certain things breathe and live once you filmed them, or are you thinking about it in advance a little bit more sometimes?
It's usually as I'm seeing the episodes and sort of thinking about, the other thing I will say, in my, not that it's, I have to say in my defense, but I will say for 8 years, I've not had a break. I haven't had any time to sit down and arc a year's show. I'm usually finished production and immediately open the room for the next season. So I haven't really had the chance to sit down and think, well, what would I do for an entire year? I have to just go with it because I got to get it done. But I think if you have good, rich, grounded, interesting, dynamic story points, then you're going to be able to use them over and over. You're going to be able to call them back. You're going to be able to, and we always call things back. We always bring back characters because that's the history of the show. And I think fans also like that. So if you have something interesting, you're going to be able to use it and mine it longer. You're going to be able to come back to it. And like for instance, for like, Black Lives Matter, people sometimes say to us like, oh, it's like ripped from the headline, some of the stories, like, how did you know that this would be a thing? And I was like, it's not like police brutality and racism is new, and, it's not like it's going to go away. So whatever story we tell about that, there's going to be something that's going to come up in the headlines about it because it's happening every day. And so, when we first started the series, Stefan Clark had just been shot up in, I think, Oakland. And we had we wanted an activist character. And I thought, well, maybe we should do a trial. And then for a minute, I thought, well, by the time the show comes on the air, that'll have already passed. And then I'm like, well, but it's not like there won't be a new one and another one and another one, unfortunately. And we need to tell the story because it's going to resonate. And, when it was Black Lives Matter, I like to talk to the real people. I like to do research. I like consultants. So I just tried to track down Patrisse Cullors, and, she agreed to talk to me on the phone. And I'm like, hey, listen, so I'm this white woman, I'm writing this show, and I've got this activist character, this Black activist character. I don't know what I'm doing. I want to do it right. Would you be willing to talk to me about this? And would you be willing to play yourself on the show? And here's the story. And she's like, wow. She said, nobody in Hollywood has ever called us and asked us to consult and asked us and said that they wanted to do it right. And so much of it's done wrong that I do want to do it. And then, we got closer. She became a consultant. And then I asked her to come in the writer's room. Would you be interested? And she's like, I'd love to. And so it was great because truth is stranger than fiction. I would much rather have people telling me their real stories, their real life stories and experiences than me trying to make it up. I could never make anything up as brilliant as people's true lives.
And there's so many different threads, even looking beyond that, when you're diving into the tech world, when you're diving into a lot of the legalese for Callie's mm-hmm. career, in terms of the details and the specifics and the authenticity that you bring into the show. And so beyond your work with Patrisse for those storylines, what are some of the other spaces and ways that you're constantly looking to make sure that you are consulting with the right voices and researching to make sure that it always carries through that level of authenticity, no matter what the storyline is?
Yeah, we have consultants for tech and we have consultants for legal. And, we talk to lawyers and we talk to detectives and we talk to, depending on what the story we're doing. And because I don't know anything about tech, I wouldn't be able, it's like blah, blah, blah. And then the person fills it in, we just go like, and then blah, 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 tech. And then they'll sort of fill it in and help us with it. And we also, our production designer and our art department team and our costume designer. I mean, all our department heads are so good at research. They find their own consultants and they also make sure they're getting it right because they really care. And so I'm surrounded by the most amazing team, and we all enjoy research. You know, we all enjoy trying to get it as close to real as we can.
And I also really enjoy that when you dive into those worlds, that you really give us fully fleshed out characters. It's not just, okay, the character goes to work and we see them because they're having an issue and then they come home and everything is all fun and they leave it behind. You really capture, you know, the essence of these characters who are following something that they're so passionate about that it really bleeds into their life in other ways, you know, and even if you do have them change jobs, you know, after you've developed this entire ecosystem of other characters, you then bring in, you know, Constance Zimmer and build this really beautifully complex character and her co-workers around her all over again. And so I was really interested in how you always make sure that there is that full ecosystem of really layered characters, even when you're having to constantly rebuild it almost.
Yeah, I think that what's really important is everything comes from character and everything has to inform character. So like, you don't want to do a story just for the sake of it. It has to be like, how does even an issue, how does that affect, you know, how does pretrial detention affect our character, Malika, and grow her? It can't just be like, we're just going to plug them into a story. And then the Kathleen Gale, which I love so much. Well, did you watch that Making a Murderer?
Yes.
Documentary? Well, so you know that attorney, the
Yeah.
attorney he gets, and that. Well, I just thought she's genius, and I think her name's Kathleen. And I just thought, oh, she's so interesting, and she'd be a wonderful mentor character for Callie. And we all missed the Judge Wilson, that dynamic in the first season and that clerkship, and we wanted to freshen that up because it was just hard to find stories in it as clerks. You know, it was like hard to find. You know, you always got to find some kind of conflict. And so it just sort of felt like we had sort of done that. And it didn't really feel like, I didn't really believe that Callie really in her heart wanted to be a clerk to a conservative judge. And so, you know, we tried the legal aid aspect in the second season, but we really wanted to get back to that dynamic that we had. And so, you know, I had an idea for this character, and Constance is a mom at the school where my kids go, and we'd gotten to know each other a little bit, and she also wanted to direct, and she said, can I come shadow your show? So she came and shadowed, and I just said to her, you know, I had this idea for this character, would you ever do our show? And she's like, of course I would. And I'm like, you would? I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. And to write for her, it's just been a dream. I mean, I don't know if you watched Unreal, but she is
Phenomenal.
unreal. I mean, she is a phenomenal actress, and it's just the greatest pleasure. I love writing speeches for her. I love what she can, all of our cast. I mean, if you look at the paper on this page, sometimes I'm like, I don't know if this scene's going to work. And then our cast takes it and makes magic. I mean, it's really a collaboration. And it's so thrilling as a writer to see the actors come in and make you better, which is what they do every single time. And Constance has just been a real delight to have. And she also directed an episode that will air in the next season, and she did an amazing job. So yeah, I like creating new worlds. And I have to say, much to the chagrin sometimes of production and our poor costume designer, Dina Appel, who's so brilliant. Like, there are times when we have 53 cast in an episode, 53, and she has to dress every one of them. And, you know, we created this big comedy world for Alice, and, you know, then created this new world for Callie. And then, you know, we've got, there's going to be a new world with Mariana. And it's just, and with everybody's world comes more characters to build and more people to dress and more people for hair and makeup to get ready. And I have to say, they've never said no to me. You know, the only thing they ever said no was, I said to Dina, I said, oh, I want to do a Bridgerton fantasy where everyone in the coterie is at one of those those parties that they have, you know, and everyone in period costume. And she's like, no, I cannot do that. You cannot do it. And I was like, okay, I understand. Maybe not a good idea anyway, but you know, sometimes when I'm watching a show, I'll get an idea of something I want to do. Anyway.
love it. And because you just mentioned that, the initial conversation with Constance was actually about her coming in and shadowing, is that something where you've had other directors throughout the show come in and shadow? And has that become part of the ethos of how you run that?
Yes, we have shadows on almost every episode. And we give a lot of opportunity to first-time directors. And we have a few this season that it was their first television, 1 hour drama to shoot. And it's something we really like to do. And so I feel like we almost have a shadow school running, in our production. And all our directors are so lovely about accepting that and having a shadow and really teaching people. And unfortunately, in COVID, they've only been able to shadow virtually this year because we just did not want one more body on set for everybody to have to deal with. I think you probably know we have zones, and it's just I just didn't want to give people one more person to have to, put your mask on, put your shield on, get everyone out of this zone. It's just a lot.
And you yourself have directed not only on this show, but also previously on The Fosters. And how has that really evolved, that your collaboration with directors coming into the show and the way that you work with them, having also stepped behind the camera yourself and gone through that process?
I think it's great for any writer, or especially showrunner, to get behind the camera and direct, because it makes you a lot more forgiving and you aren't so mad when you see a cut and you're not happy with something. You're like, things happen. I understand now. I've been there, had that happen. I mean, and whenever I direct, there's something I forget. And so I think it's really helpful. And I really learned to direct by doing the editing process is where I really learned the most about it. And I went to film school, but I came out of film school as a terrible director. And it wasn't until I really was, looking at cuts all the time that I started to understand, how to put it together and how to do it. And I quite love it. I just don't get to do it very often because I can't step away from the writing and the rest of production. So it has to usually be a finale. So I'm going to do this finale, which I'm really excited about, in season 3. So I look forward to being on set.
Can't wait to watch that one. And then, I love how effusively the cast talk about how the journeys of their characters and the types of topics that they get to address through their characters has really made a real world shift for a lot of them in how they think about their platform and their voice and, their own lives. And so for you, in getting to write and construct and build this world and, explore so many of these topics and themes throughout the show, I was interested in kind of the personal evolution and impact that that's had on you throughout your time on the series so far.
I've learned so much from doing The Fosters and doing Good Trouble. I've evolved a lot, and I have a lot to go. I have a lot more to go. But what I really learned doing these shows is that I need to learn more, and that especially as a white person with a lot of privilege, I need to educate myself. I need to be doing that work. I need to be reading. I need to be talking to people, and I need to be really taking a different perspective, looking at different perspectives on issues. And, for The Fosters, my wife and I have adopted children, and we're a multiracial family. So it was amazing. I didn't write the pilot. Peter Page and Brad Bradwick wrote the pilot, and they needed a showrunner. And like, I couldn't believe I was going to be able to write my life in so many ways. These two women, I'm like raising children. And I was just like, I couldn't believe that was on television. Now today I would believe it. But back then there was nothing like that. And, ABC Family, it was called back then, had the guts to put that show on the air. And it had so many issues that were just baked into it because of foster care system and, a mixed family and raising children that have, birth parents out there. And it just had so many wonderful, interesting issues. And even with having adopted children, I didn't really know that much about the foster care system. I learned so much. And then in this show, of course, I've learned so much about many different issues. And it's been really gratifying for that. It's been great for my evolution as a human being.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really phenomenal when you look at the scope of both of those shows across all of the seasons, all of the things that you've managed to explore story-wise, and it's always so grounded through character. And it's such a pleasure to watch all of your work all the time. And thank you so much for taking time to have this conversation with us.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure, and thank you for your interest.